The sound was the problem. Today it was the dentist's drill from room 2B, a high, thin whine, like metal on metal torture. For Jack, it was the sound of a Blackhawk's hydraulics, leaking right before the drop. He sat on a beige plastic chair in the VA clinic's waiting room. The light was too bright, a fluorescent flicker that hummed at the wrong frequency. The room smelled of antiseptic and delayed hope. Jack was vibrating. Not a visible shake, but a low-frequency vibration from deep inside his chassis, like an engine on the verge of stalling. His recon instincts, the only part of him that still worked, were screaming. He counted. 3 exits. 2 security guards, overweight and bored. 17 people in the room, none of them really seeing anything. His right hand was a fist. His nails, short and clean, dug into his own palm. He focused on the pain. "You are here. You are in Virginia, not Kandahar." The drill shrieked again. Jack's breath hitched. The room compressed. The pale yellow walls began to pulse. And then, the miracle. From beneath his chair, a warm, heavy weight pressed onto his boot. A cold, wet nose jammed against his ankle. Bravo. The 90-pound Belgian Malinois slid out from under the seat. The starburst scar where shrapnel had claimed his left eye was a puckered, pale pink. Bravo made no sound, no whimper. He was better trained than that. He simply rose, placed his broad, intelligent head on Jack's knee, and pushed. A steady, insistent, physical pressure. "I am here. Come back to me." Jack's breath tore out of his chest in a ragged whoosh. The panic, which had been seconds from overwhelming him, receded. It was like a tide being pulled back by an unseen moon. Jack unclenched his fist and laid his hand on Bravo's head, his fingers sinking into the thick, short fur. Bravo let out a low, satisfied sigh. His intervention task was complete. The dog was his anchor. "Reed, Jack Reed," a nurse called out, her eyes never leaving the clipboard. Jack stood. Bravo stood with him, moving in a liquid, practiced motion that was perfectly in sync with Jack's left leg. They were a single unit. They collected the prescription, pills Jack hated but needed, and walked out into the humid, oppressive August air. His studio apartment was even more desolate than the VA. A mattress on the floor, a humming mini-fridge holding half a carton of milk and a bag of premium dog food. Unopened cardboard boxes, stacked against a wall for 6 months, had become a monument to his paralysis. He couldn't hold a job. The warehouse gig ended when the shift change horn sent him diving for cover. The night security job ended when he nearly broke the arm of a delivery driver he'd mistaken for an insurgent. It was the guilt. That was his demon. Not the things he'd seen, but the one thing he'd done. The failed recon mission. A split-second miscalculation, a bad call on the wind, and the asset he was supposed to protect. Bravo nudged his empty bowl with his nose. "I know, buddy," Jack mumbled. He reached for the bag of kibble. That's when he saw the mail. His mailbox usually held only pizza flyers and overdue VA copays. Today there were 2 items. The first was a small, battered package wrapped in brown duct tape. The handwriting was careless, urgent, and unmistakable. Mike. Mike was the only one who got it. The only one who knew about that last mission. The only one who didn't look at Jack like he was broken glass. And Mike had been missing for 6 months, vanished from his barracks at Fort Bragg. Not a word. Jack's hands were shaking, but this time, it wasn't the PTSD. He tore the package open. Inside, there was no explanation. Just 3 items. A single old-fashioned brass house key, a faded Polaroid, Jack and Mike, 10 years younger, grinning with beers in hand, standing in front of a dilapidated cabin that looked one stiff breeze from collapse. And a small scrap of paper, torn from a military issue, right in the rain notebook, written in thick black marker. 6 words. "Trust no one. Burn this." Jack stared at the words. His heart was hammering, a battlefield rhythm he thought he'd forgotten. This wasn't a greeting. This was a warning. "What were you into, Mike?" he whispered. Bravo, sensing the seismic shift in the room, stood up and let out a low, barely audible growl, staring at the apartment door. And then Jack saw the second item from the mailbox, a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It looked expensive. The return address read, Hewitt and Steele, Attorneys at Law. He ripped it open with his thumb. The letter was short. "Mr. Reed, it is with regret we must inform you of the passing of our client, Mr. Michael Mike Navarro." Jack stopped breathing. The VA, the drill, the world, it all went silent. They said it was an accident, DUI, a car off a rural bridge. But Jack knew Mike. Mike didn't drink. Not ever. He called it mission poison. The package from Mike wasn't a hello. It was a goodbye, a dead man's switch. Jack forced himself to read the rest of the letter. As the sole named beneficiary in Mr. Navarro's last will and testament, his entire estate, consisting of a property at 941 Raccoon Creek Road, is hereby transferred to you. 41 Raccoon Creek Road. Jack looked at the Polaroid, the cabin. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a summons. For the first time in a year, the vibration inside Jack stopped. The guilt, the shame, the fear, they weren't gone, but they were shoved aside, replaced by something cold, sharp, and far more familiar. Focus. He looked down at Bravo. The dog was watching him, his one good eye bright, alert. Ready. All right, buddy, Jack said, his voice raspy from disuse. We're going for a ride. He wasn't going to claim an inheritance. He was going to find an answer. He was going to hunt. For a man who had nothing left to lose, a mission was the only thing left. The highway was a hypnotic, 6-lane river of asphalt, but it didn't last. Jack's '98 Ford Ranger, a machine with more rust than paint, had devoured the interstate miles with a steady, rumbling drone. Bravo sat rigid in the passenger seat, not as a pet, but as a co-pilot, his single eye scanning the horizon. Jack drove with a military-grade economy of motion. His hands were locked at 10 and 2, his focus absolute. The mission had provided a purpose that no therapist or pill ever could. It had made the world simple again. But simplicity ended where the pavement did. The GPS on his phone had died 70 miles back. He was navigating by a sun-faded paper map he'd found in Mike's package and the green rust-pocked road signs. He exited the state highway and the world changed. The 4-lane blacktop became a 2-lane county road. The county road became a farm-to-market route. Finally, he turned onto a road that was little more than 2 tire tracks separated by weeds. The trees, tall, dense pines and ancient moss-draped oaks, closed in, forming a canopy that choked the sunlight. The air grew heavy, still, and humid. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. They needed gas and supplies. According to the map, the last stop before Raccoon Creek Road was the town of Pinhook. Pinhook wasn't a town. It was a scar. A single dilapidated gas station with one rusted pump stood across from a building that called itself a general store, its porch sagging under the weight of its own roof. A 70s-era pickup truck, its engine block hanging from a chain hoist, was left to die in the gravel lot. Jack pulled the Ranger up to the pump. As he stepped out, the squeak of his truck's old springs was obscenely loud in the quiet. From the porch of the store, 2 old-timers in faded denim overalls stopped their conversation. They didn't wave. They just watched. Bravo remained in the truck, but he was no longer the relaxed therapy dog. He was alert, his head up, his stump of a tail held low and stiff. He was working. Jack went inside the store. A bell taped to the door gave a dull, dead thud. The air inside smelled of dust, spoiled milk, and something vaguely metallic. A young woman who looked 40 but was probably 20 sat behind the counter, reading a celebrity magazine. Jack moved with purpose. He grabbed a gallon jug of water, a bag of beef jerky, a canister of cheap coffee, and 4 D-cell batteries. He placed them on the counter. The girl didn't look up. "That all?" she asked, her voice flat. "Need to pay for gas. Pump 2, Jack said. She finally raised her eyes. They were flat like old beer. She scanned his items, her gaze lingering on his tactical-style pants, his military-issue boots. Her eyes flicked to the window, to the Ranger, and to the silhouette of the dog staring back. "Pump 2's broke," she said. Jack looked at the pump. He looked back at her. "The sign says, pay first." "Sign's old." One of the men from the porch entered, letting the screen door slam. He was thick, with a belly that strained his Skoll t-shirt. He didn't look at Jack, but spoke to the girl. "Heard they found Harlan's boat down by the reservoir." "Heard that," she replied, still staring at Jack. "You ain't from around here," the man said to Jack. It wasn't a question. "Looking for a place," Jack said, his voice neutral. "Ain't no places to look for," the man said. He grabbed a can of motor oil and stood uncomfortably close to Jack. Unless you're lost. You lost, friend. The word friend was an insult. Jack felt the vibration start, the familiar tremor in his hands. But Bravo, from the truck, let out a single, low, resonating bark. It wasn't a panic. It was a command. The man flinched, his eyes wide. He took a half step back, his gaze fixed on the dog. That a Malinois? Thing looks mean. He's a veteran, Jack said. He pulled a 20 and a 10 from his wallet and laid them on the counter. This'll cover the gas I'm about to pump. He turned and walked out. He didn't wait for permission. The girl and the man just watched him go. He filled the tank, the ancient pump groaning in protest. The silence from the store was absolute. He got his change, which she'd left on the counter, and climbed back into the truck. As he pulled away, he saw the man from the store on the porch, now on a cell phone, watching the truck disappear down the road. Raccoon Creek Road was 6 miles further. The name on the sign was riddled with buckshot. The road itself was just red clay and gravel, a tunnel carved through a jungle of kudzu and pine. The ranger's suspension groaned. When he saw the house, it was exactly as the Polaroid had shown, only more haunted. It wasn't just neglected, it was being consumed. The front porch sagged, the roof was a patchwork of rust and tar, and the woods were in the process of swallowing the backyard. Jack parked the truck. "Wait here," he commanded Bravo. He stepped out. The air was dead, no birds, no insects, just silence. His training took over. He wasn't an heir, he was a scout on a recon mission. He didn't walk to the front door. He flanked the building, checking windows. He found a back door, its lock already broken. He entered low and fast, his senses screaming. The house was cold. It smelled of mildew, old whiskey, and gunpowder. He cleared it, room by room. A living room with a single busted-up recliner. A kitchen with a formica table and one dirty coffee cup in the sink. A bathroom where the mirror was cracked. Finally, the bedroom. A bare mattress. A small military-issue footlocker. He was alone. But the house was not empty. It was full of Mike. Full of the man's last, desperate days. This wasn't a home. It was a safe house that had failed. As dusk began to bleed through the filthy windows, painting the room in shades of gray and purple, Jack stood in the center of the living room, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He had found Mike's last stand. Then Bravo barked again from the truck. A different bark, sharp, high-pitched, and urgent. Headlights. A vehicle was creeping up the gravel road, its engine cut, rolling to a stop behind his truck. Jack moved to the window, his hand instinctively dropping to the empty space on his hip where his sidearm used to be. A dark green SUV with a faded county emblem on the door. A man stepped out. He was tall, thick, wearing a sheriff's uniform that was stretched tight over his gut. He didn't look like a cop. He looked like the man who owned the store, just with a badge. The sheriff put on his hat, looked at the house, looked at the ranger, and then looked right at the window Jack was peering from. He raised a hand in a slow, almost mocking wave. The confrontation had arrived. Jack wasn't just visiting a dead man's property. He had just stepped into the very trap that had killed his friend. Jack's body went cold, his training overriding the flash of panic. He didn't move from the window. He just watched the sheriff. The man was a caricature of small-town law, a heavy-duty leather belt sagging under the weight of a gut, a holstered pistol, and a tin of chew outlining his back pocket. He was a man who had never missed a meal and never lost a fight. The sheriff adjusted his hat, his gaze fixed on the house, and took a slow, deliberate step toward the porch. Jack knew he had two options: hide like a rat or meet the threat. He exhaled slowly, the box breathing his therapist had taught him, and moved. He didn't go to the broken back door. He walked to the front door, the one that hadn't been opened in God knows how long, and kicked it. The wood, swollen and rotten, resisted, then gave way with a sound like a breaking bone. He stepped out onto the sagging porch. The humidity hit him like a wet towel. The sheriff stopped, maybe 15 yards away, his hand resting casually on his belt. Bravo, in the truck, let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the steel of the door. "That's a long way from nowhere, son," the sheriff said. His voice was a gravelly baritone, friendly in a way that set Jack's teeth on edge. "Just looking at the property," Jack said, his voice flat. He kept his hands visible, away from his pockets. Right. The sheriff nodded slowly, his eyes doing a professional sweep. Jack's military boots, his tactical pants, the truck, the dog. "You must be Mr. Reed. Jack Reed. Heard you were coming." "You hear a lot," Jack stated. The sheriff chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Pinhook's a small pond. Not much happens that we don't all see." "I'm Sheriff Boddicker." He didn't offer a hand. "Tragic thing about Mike. Real tragic." Boddicker paused, watching for a reaction. "Booz'll get you, though. Saw it 100 times." This was the test. Jack knew it. This was the moment where he was supposed to nod, look sad, and accept the official story. "Mike wasn't a drunk," Jack said. The air between them changed. The sheriff's folksy mask didn't slip, but his eyes, small and dark, hardened. "Grief does funny things to a man's memory," Boddicker said, his tone shifting. It was no longer a conversation. It was a lecture. Mike, he'd been struggling. Folks saw it. Caused a bit of trouble. Got into things he shouldn't have. "What things?" Sheriff Boddicker smiled. "The kind of things that are best left settled, son. Folks around here, we value our privacy. We don't take kindly to city people coming down, kicking up mud, and asking about old business that's already been filed." He spat a stream of brown tobacco juice onto the weeds. "You got your property. That's fine. The bank will be in touch about the back taxes. My advice? Settle up, sell it for lumber. This place, it ain't worth the trouble it's already caused." It was a direct, unambiguous threat. "I'll keep that in mind, Sheriff." "You do that." Boddicker tipped his hat, a gesture of absolute dismissal. He walked back to his SUV, climbed in, and started the engine. He didn't just drive away. He backed the vehicle up the entire length of the gravel road, his headlights fixed on Jack, before finally turning around and disappearing into the trees. The silence that rushed back in was worse than the confrontation. Jack's hand was shaking. He had failed the test. He hadn't been a passive, grieving vet. He'd been defiant. He had confirmed he was a problem. He let Bravo out of the truck. The dog didn't run, didn't sniff, didn't mark territory. He emerged with a low whine, his body coiled. This wasn't the VA clinic therapy dog. This was the K9, the partner. He immediately began a low-light patrol, sweeping the perimeter of the house, his nose to the ground, his stump of a tail held low and rigid. Jack went back inside. The house was no longer just Mike's tomb. It was hostile territory. He had to assume he was being watched. He had to find what Mike had left for him, and he had to find it now. He started in the bedroom, tossing the bare mattress. Nothing. He ripped the back panel off the empty dresser. Nothing. He checked the water tank of the toilet. Nothing. He was moving with frantic energy, his frustration mounting. He was looking for a needle in a haystack, and Boddicker was coming back with a lit match. He felt the old paralysis creeping in, the overwhelming fog of, what now? That's when he heard it. Scratch, whine, scratch, scratch. He froze. It came from the kitchen. Bravo. Jack moved, his boots quiet on the floorboards. Bravo was not at the window. He was in the corner of the small kitchen, pawing frantically at the floor beneath a set of built-in cabinets. The linoleum, yellowed and cracked like old teeth, was already torn up by his claws. "What is it, buddy?" Jack whispered. "A rat?" Bravo stopped. He looked back at Jack with his one intense, intelligent eye and let out a single sharp bark. It wasn't a play bark. It was an attention bark. This was an indication. This was the dog he'd been trained to be. He was signaling. Jack was on his knees in an instant. He shoved Bravo aside. "Good boy, show me." Bravo pawed again at one specific spot. Jack tore back the rest of the loose linoleum. Underneath were the original pine floorboards. Most were dark with age and grime. But one section, about 2 feet by 2 feet, was just slightly different. The wood was cleaner. The nail heads weren't rusted shut. Jack pulled his multi-tool from his belt. He didn't have a crowbar. He jammed the flathead screwdriver bit into the seam and pried. His knuckles scraped against the gritty floor as he put his full weight into it. The old wood groaned. Snap. The board came loose. Jack pulled it up. Then the next one. Underneath, in the shallow, damp crawl space, sat a .50 caliber military-issue ammo can. It was dry. His heart was a hammer. Bravo sat perfectly still, his job done. He was watching Jack. Jack reached into the darkness and lifted the can out. It was heavy. He wiped the cobwebs off the latch. He paused. His breath held. He popped the seal. The hiss of air was explosive in the silent house. He opened the lid. The smell of gun oil, paper, and cash. On top were stacks of $100 bills, bound in thick rubber bands. More money than Jack had seen in his entire life. Beneath the money was a non-regulation Sig Sauer P226, compact, with 3 full magazines beside it. It was perfectly oiled, ready to go. And at the very bottom, beneath it all, was the journal. The same write-in-the-rain notebook from the package. Jack ignored the money. He ignored the gun. He grabbed the notebook. He sat at the grimy kitchen table, the light from the setting sun barely illuminating the page. Bravo came and laid his heavy head on Jack's boot. He opened it, Mike's handwriting, sharp, angular, urgent. The first few pages were just what Boddicker had warned him against. A surveillance log, license plates, times. Green SUV, Boddicker, at Crossroads, 0200. Store girl, Connie, logs all non-local plates. White pickup, unknown, meets Boddicker at HY19 turnoff. Exchange. Mike hadn't just been hiding, he'd been hunting. Jack flipped to the last entry, dated just 1 week after Jack had received the package. The writing was frantic, pressing so hard it tore the paper. It's the sheriff. It's all him. The whole damn town is in on it. They're not smuggling. They're making it. The old poultry plant. That's the lab. Harlan's boat. He wasn't fishing. He found the dump site. They killed him. Just like they're going to kill me. Jack, if you read this, they got me. They'll say it was the bottle. They'll say it was an accident. It's a lie. The proof is at the plant. My cash is... The entry stopped. The next page had been violently torn out. Jack closed the notebook. The pieces slammed into place. The warning at the store, the sheriff's visit, Mike's accident. He was sitting in a murder victim's house, holding the murder weapon, the motive, and the case file. The sheriff's visit hadn't been a warning. It had been a threat assessment, and Jack had just told him everything he needed to know. He looked at the gun. He looked at the dog. He looked at the door. He wasn't a grieving veteran anymore. He was an investigator, and he was the only one left who knew the truth. There was no time for grief. The slam of the notebook closing was a starting pistol. The cold, hard weight of the Sig P216 in his hand was the first thing Jack had felt in a year that made sense. It wasn't his old service issue M17, but the balance was there. The purpose was there. He worked with a speed that defied his recent history. The fog of the VA clinic, the heavy, viscous pull of his own guilt, it all burned away, replaced by the white-hot adrenaline of a mission gone live. He field-stripped the Sig on the grimy kitchen table, his hands moving with an old practiced economy. Clean, oiled, perfect. He checked the magazine, chambered around, and engaged the safety. The snick click of the mechanism was the most comforting sound he'd ever heard. He shoved the stacks of cash and Mike's notebook into his own worn tactical go-bag. He left the ammo can. It was a decoy. Let them find it. Let them think he was sloppy. He looked at Bravo. The dog was no longer a therapy animal. His intervention posture was gone. He was standing in the center of the room, coiled, alert, his one eye fixed on Jack, his body vibrating with anticipation. He was waiting for the command. "With me," Jack whispered. They didn't take the truck. The Ranger was a target, a neon sign pointing right at him. Boddicker would have the access road watched. Jack was a Trinsat, a scout. You never leave by the same door you entered. He and Bravo slipped out the broken back door and into the deepening twilight. They didn't move toward the road. They moved away from it, melting into the dense, suffocating embrace of the pine forest and kudzu vines that bordered the property. The woods were a wall of green, but to Jack, it was a highway. He moved with a practiced silence, his feet finding soft earth, avoiding dry leaves and twigs. Bravo moved ahead of him, a dark, silent shadow, his nose tasting the air. They were a team. They were a single weapon. He didn't run. He flanked, using the terrain to cover his own exit. He circled wide, moving east, until he hit a small ridge that gave him a clear line of sight back to the house and the gravel road. He went prone in the undergrowth, his go-bag beside him. He pulled a small set of 8X binoculars from a side pocket. An old habit. He and Bravo established an LPOP, a listening observation post, and they waited. The dark didn't just fall, it rose from the ground like a black tide. The forest came alive with the sounds of insects and tree frogs. And then another sound. A vehicle, engine running, moving faster than the sheriff had. Jack put the binoculars to his eyes. Headlights cut through the gloom. It wasn't Boddicker's SUV. It was a mud-stained white pickup truck. The man from the Pinhook General Store, the one with the skull ring in his back pocket, was driving. Another man sat in the passenger seat. They didn't park politely. They skidded to a stop, gravel flying. They left the headlights on, illuminating the cabin in a stark, accusatory glare. They weren't cops. They were local muscle. "They ain't here to talk," Jack whispered. Bravo let out a soundless rumble, his body tense. The two men burst from the truck. They didn't knock. The passenger kicked in the same front door Jack had. They went inside, beams from their flashlights cutting through the windows. Jack watched, his breathing steady, his heart a cold, hard knot. He saw the lights move frantically from room to room. He saw the mattress get thrown. He saw the kitchen cabinets get ripped open. They were searching. Boddicker had sent his hounds. After 5 minutes, they stumbled back out onto the porch, empty-handed and angry. The driver got on a cell phone. Even from 100 yards, Jack could feel the man's agitation. "He ain't here," the man yelled into the phone. "Nothing. Just his truck." "The box?" "Yeah, we got it, but the other shit ain't in it. What do you want us to do?" "Yeah? All right. All right." He hung up. He looked at Jack's truck. Then he and his partner climbed back into their own pickup, slammed the doors, and tore back down the gravel road, leaving a cloud of red dust in their wake. The hunt was officially on. Boddicker knew the notebook was gone. Now it was Jack's turn. He gave it 30 minutes, then moved. "Heel!" he commanded. He didn't go back to the house. He checked the compass on his watch. Mike's last entry had given him the target, the old poultry plant. It was 3 clicks northwest. He and Bravo moved through the woods, this time with a new purpose. This wasn't evasion. This was infiltration. This was his job. The paranoia, the flashbacks, the crowds at the VA. All of that was from a different lifetime. Out here in the dark, with a K9 at his side and a mission in his sights, Jack was not a victim. He was a predator. The old poultry plant was a rusted metal ghost against the skyline. It sat in a clearing, a massive corrugated steel carcass of a dead industry. The sign near the gate, Pinhook Poultry, was swinging on one hinge. Jack stopped them 200 yards out. "Watch," he whispered, and Bravo sat, perfectly still, scanning the darkness. Jack used his binoculars. The place was supposed to be derelict, but the chain-link fence had new concertina wire strung across the top. The no trespassing signs were brand new, and on the far corner of the main building, a motion-activated security camera, its red IR light glowing faintly, swept the perimeter. He smelled it before he saw it. Not the old, dusty smell of chicken feed and rot. It was the sharp, acidic stench of anhydrous ammonia and chemicals. The unmistakable signature of a meth lab. A big one. This wasn't some small-town operation. This was a factory. As he watched, a vehicle approached, this time from the main road. Sheriff Boddicker's SUV. It pulled up to the gate, which slid open electronically. The SUV drove inside and parked next to a single-lit office. Boddicker got out. He was met by a man in a clean polo shirt, not a local, not muscle. This was a businessman. Jack watched as Boddicker opened the back of his SUV. He handed a duffel bag to the man, who in turn handed him a thick envelope. A simple, clean transaction. The sheriff wasn't just ignoring the lab. He was running protection for it. He was the logistical arm. Boddicker got back in his vehicle and drove out. The gate slid shut. Jack had his confirmation. He had seen the enemy. He had seen the operation. Mike hadn't exaggerated. He and Bravo pulled back, melting into the woods as silently as they had come. Jack found a secure, defensible position on high ground, a nest of fallen trees. He sat with his back to a thick oak, the loaded cig resting on his thigh. He gave Bravo the last of his water. The dog licked his hand, then settled at his feet, facing outward, on guard. The sheriff was dirty. The town was complicit, and they were all hunting him. Jack looked up at the sliver of moon. He wasn't scared. He was angry. And for the first time since he'd come home, he knew exactly what he had to do. This wasn't about Mike's past anymore. It was about Jack's future. He had a new mission. Burn it all to the ground. The woods offered a cold comfort. In the dense, damp undergrowth, Jack was king. He and Bravo moved like water through the darkness, putting distance between themselves and the illuminated cancer of the meth lab. The adrenaline of the reconnaissance mission had been clean, sharp, and pure. It was a feeling he'd been chasing for a year, a feeling he thought he'd lost. He found a defensible position, a deep recess in the earth where a massive oak had been uprooted, creating a natural trench. He signaled, and Bravo dropped into a low, silent watch. Jack sat, his back to the root ball, the loaded cig resting on his thigh. And then, as it always did, the adrenaline began to recede. The crash came. The silence, which had been his ally, now became a container for the noise in his head. The high-altitude whine of his tinnitus returned. He was alone. He was 300 miles from a world he barely understood. He was being hunted by a man who was the law, and he was trespassing on ground owned by a cartel. This wasn't a mission, it was a suicide note. The old panic, the familiar specter of the VA waiting room, began to creep back in. His hands started to feel a vibration that wasn't there. "No," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Not here." He needed a focus, a task. He unzipped his go bag and pulled out Mike's notebook. He didn't look at the surveillance logs. He'd already seen those. He flipped to the back, where Mike had written personal, frantic notes. He'd read the last entry, the one that got torn out, but he hadn't read the pages before it. His small red-lensed headlamp illuminated the words. It was Mike's familiar, angry scrawl. August 4th, Boddicker cornered me at the store. Didn't threaten. He smiled. Asked me how I was adjusting. He knew my discharge date. He knew my rating. He was holding my file. Jack's blood ran cold. He read on. August 7th, he's poisoning the well. Told the diner girl I was unstable. Told the hardware guy I was a ticking clock. He's not just watching me. He's discrediting me. He's building a narrative. He's using our service against us. He knows about Kandahar. He knows about Jack. He asked if my crazy vet buddy was coming to visit. It hit Jack like a physical blow. The painful truth wasn't just the meth. It was this. This was Boddicker's real weapon. In a small, insulated town, a man's reputation was his only currency. Boddicker hadn't just killed Mike. He had erased him first. He'd preemptively painted Mike as a crazy, unreliable vet, a man suffering from delusions. The drunk driving story wasn't just a cover-up. It was the final sentence in a character assassination he'd been writing for months. And now he was doing it to Jack. The girl at the store, the man with the skull, the advice to sell the house. It was all part of the same play. Jack wasn't a man. He was a stereotype. He was a loose end. And Boddicker was going to tie him up using the very trauma Jack had fought to survive. A sound, not a twig snap. Bravo's head lifted, a low rumble starting deep in his chest. Jack clicked off his light. Shh, listen. Voices, not tactical, loud, clumsy. Man, I ain't nothing out here but snakes. Shut up, Earl. Boddicker said he's on foot. He'll be in this perimeter. The local muscle. The men from the white pickup. They were doing a sweep. Jack smiled without humor. This was amateur hour. They were using bright white flashlights, talking, complaining. They were making enough noise to wake the dead. He looked at Bravo. Easy, he breathed. He didn't have to move. They were on the wrong side of the ridge, a clumsy net being dragged through an empty pond. Jack and Bravo were shadows, and the hunters passed them by, oblivious. But Jack knew this was just the first wave, the scare. Boddicker was testing him, trying to flush him out. He wouldn't commit his real assets until he had to. Jack had to move, and he had to change the game. He couldn't win a war of attrition. He needed to escape, reset, and find a way to make a call to someone outside Boddicker's control. He needed his truck. It was a gamble. Boddicker knew he needed his truck, but it was the only play. With me, buddy, quiet. They moved circling wide, parallel to the clumsy search party, using their noise to cover his own retreat. It took an hour of slow, agonizing, tactical movement, back through the woods, down the ridge, toward the gravel road where his rangers sat like a tombstone. He made it to the edge of the tree line, 100 yards from the cabin. His truck was still there. The search party was still in the woods to the east. The house was dark. It was too easy. Watch, he whispered. Bravo stopped, his nose high. Jack scanned the property. Nothing. He scanned the shadows around the truck. Nothing. He scanned the porch of the cabin. A pinpoint of light, a small red glow. like the cherry of a cigarette. The shadow on the porch moved. A man stepped out of the darkness, his heavy frame silhouetted by the distant moon. Sheriff Boddicker. He'd been waiting, not searching, waiting. He'd let his dogs run, knowing all along where the fox would go. Boddicker stood beside the porch rail, not 50 yards from Jack's position. "You can stop skulking in the woods, son," Boddicker's voice boomed, calm and confident. "It's disrespectful. You're trampling on a dead man's property." Jack didn't move. Bravo let out a low, almost inaudible whine. "I know you're out there. I can smell the adrenaline." Boddicker chuckled. He took a drag from his cigarette. "I read your file, Jack. I read Mike's too. You boys, you see threats in every shadow. You think you're still on a mission. But there's no mission here. There's just business." This was it, the psychological attack. Mike couldn't let it go. Boddicker continued, his voice adopting a tone of false sympathy. "He was sick, just like you. He was seeing conspiracies. He was paranoid. He was a danger to himself. I tried to help him, but he wouldn't listen." "You murdered him," Jack said, his voice quiet but clear in the still night air. Boddicker was silent for a beat. The red cherry of his cigarette brightened. "That's what he'd call it. I call it maintaining the peace. And right now, son, you're disturbing it." "It's over, Sheriff. I saw the plant. I saw your payday." Boddicker laughed. "You saw what I let you see, boy. You think you're a scout? You're just a rat in a maze I built." He flicked his cigarette. It arced through the air and landed in the dust. "You had your chance to walk away. You should have taken it. Now you're just another tragic story. Another veteran who couldn't adjust, came out here, got high on his own paranoia, and, well, accidents happen." The white pickup truck, its headlights off, rolled to a stop at the end of the gravel road, blocking the only exit. The two men got out. They weren't carrying flashlights. They were carrying shotguns. The trap was sprung. "Come on out, Jack," Boddicker said, his voice no longer friendly. "Let's finish this." Jack looked at Bravo. The dog's muscles were bunched, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. This was no longer a recon mission. It was a fight for survival. This was the corner. Jack unclipped Bravo's leash. "Okay, buddy," he whispered, chambering the round in the cig. "Seek." The command was given. Seek. It was not a word of anger. It was a release. A single permissive click that unleashed 90 pounds of focused, loyal K9 grade violence. Bravo did not go for Boddicker. The sheriff was Jack's target. Bravo, with the instincts of a seasoned operator, understood flanking. He didn't bark. He didn't snarl. He simply vanished. A black shadow detaching from a darker one, melting into the woods on a silent, looping course toward the road, toward the shotguns. Boddicker, arrogant on his porch, saw nothing. He was focused on the tree line where Jack was hidden. "No more games, son. Come on out." Jack moved, but not forward. He moved left, a lateral shift, putting a different angle between himself and the porch. And then the night exploded. From the darkness 100 yards down the road, a sound ripped through the air, a wet, vicious snarl, followed by a human scream of pure terror. It was Earl. Bravo had initiated contact. "What in the hell?" Boddicker spun, his attention pulled to the chaos. "He's in the trees! He's on us!" the other man yelled. A shotgun boomed, the muzzle flash illuminating the trees, firing at a phantom. That was Jack's moment. In the second that Boddicker's head was turned, Jack broke cover. He was no longer a recon scout. He was an assaulter. He crossed the 50 yards of open ground between the woods and the porch in a low, explosive sprint. His feet, in their worn military boots, barely seemed to touch the ground. Boddicker heard him too late. He turned back, his eyes wide with shock, his hand fumbling to unclip the retention strap on his holster. He was a small-town bully, not a soldier. He was too slow. Jack hit the rotting porch steps in 2 bounds. He didn't aim his weapon. He became the weapon. He crashed into the sheriff's chest with a full-body impact, a shoulder check that sent Boddicker staggering back into the cabin's flimsy front wall. "You crazy bastard!" Boddicker choked. The air knocked from his lungs. Jack didn't speak. He was a machine of CQC, close-quarters combat. His left hand seized Boddicker's gun hand, pinning it, thumb joint locked, against the man's own thick side. His right hand, holding the cig, came up, not to the head, but jamming hard under Boddicker's chin, leveraging the man's head back with brutal force. They were tangled. Boddicker was stronger, a bull of a man, but Jack was a scientist of leverage and pain. "I'll kill you," Boddicker roared, trying to bring his weight to bear. "You already tried," Jack breathed, his voice a cold rasp. He saw the opening. He released the pressure under the chin, and in the same fluid motion, brought the butt of the cig down, hard on Boddicker's collarbone. A wet crack echoed on the porch. Boddicker screamed, his gun hand going limp as his shoulder collapsed. The sheriff's pistol clattered onto the wooden planks. "Sheriff!" a voice yelled from the road. The shotgunners were running toward the house. "You okay?" Jack kicked the pistol off the porch and pressed the muzzle of his own cig against Boddicker's temple. "Call them off, now!" Boddicker was sobbing, a mixture of rage and agony. "It's a trick, Earl. Shoot him!" "Wrong answer," Jack said. Bravo reappeared. He hadn't been fighting, he'd been hurting. He stood at the bottom of the steps, his body low, his teeth bared. He was a silent, one-eyed wolf, and he was the wall between Jack and the reinforcements. "Earl, stop! He's got the dog!" The second man screamed, skidding to a halt in the gravel. They knew the animal. They were terrified. "It's over, Sheriff," Jack said. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even breathing hard. The vibration in his hands was gone. The fog in his head was clear. "Tell them." Boddicker looked at the men. He looked at the dog. He looked at the cold, steady eyes of the man holding a gun to his head. The crazy vet was gone. This was someone else. "Stand down," Boddicker spat, his voice thick with defeat. "Stand. Down." The resolution was not a sound. It was a silence. The two men stood frozen, their shotguns pointed uselessly at the ground. Jack held his position, his gun steady. He looked at the man who had tried to gaslight him into a grave. Boddicker had used Jack's wound, his PTSD, his guilt, as a weapon. He had tried to make Jack believe his instincts were delusions. But the wound was the mission. The paranoia was the warning. The hypervigilance was the skill. The very thing that had broken him in Kandahar was the thing that had saved him here. He hadn't failed this time. He hadn't misread the signs. He hadn't lost his partner. He wasn't cured. The ghosts of his past were still there, but they were no longer in command. By facing the enemy in front of him, he had finally made peace with the one inside. He had completed the mission. He had avenged Mike. He had proven Boddicker wrong. His insanity was, in fact, his greatest strength. In the far distance, another sound. Sirens. Not the yelping whoop of a county cruiser, but the deep, powerful wail of state police. Boddicker's head snapped up. "What?" Jack had saved 1 bar of battery on his phone. 1. Before he left the woods to check the house, he'd sent a single, simple text to the only number he knew he could trust, his old CO. 941 Raccoon Creek Road. Boddicker is hostile. Send help. Mike's dead. He'd gambled that his old boss would believe him. He'd gambled that his reputation as a scout was stronger than Boddicker's narrative as a liar. Headlights, blue and red, slammed into the property. 2 state trooper vehicles. They saw the scene. A man in tactical pants holding a gun on their sheriff, 2 locals with shotguns, and a K9 standing guard. "Drop the weapon," a trooper yelled over a loudspeaker. Jack didn't move. He kept the cig on Boddicker. "I am Jack Reed. This is a crime scene." He reached slowly into his bag with his left hand and tossed Mike's notebook onto the porch. "The evidence is in there. He's the killer." Bravo sat. His job was done. He looked up at Jack, his tail giving a single soft thump on the porch step. The sun was just beginning to touch the horizon, turning the black sky to a deep, bruised purple. Jack looked at the battered house. Mike's house. His house. He wasn't running. He wasn't going back to the VA or the empty apartment. He was staying. He was home. The blue and red lights did not bring peace. They brought procedure, and procedure was its own kind of violence. "Drop the weapon, hands in the air. Do it now." The voice from the state trooper's loudspeaker was metallic, amplified, and left no room for negotiation. Boddicker, crumpled on the porch with a broken collarbone, actually laughed. "You're done, boy. You're gonna fry." Jack didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the 2 troopers who were now advancing from behind their car doors, weapons drawn in a high-ready position. This was the most dangerous moment of the night. A single twitch, a single misunderstanding, and he'd be shot dead on the porch of the house he'd just reclaimed. His combat training kicked in. De-escalation. "I am unarmed," Jack said, his voice projecting across the yard, calm and clear. "I am complying." He did not just drop the cig. He laid it gently on the porch planking, then slid it 5 feet away with his boot. He extracted the spare magazine from his pocket with 2 fingers, as if handling a dead mouse, and placed it next to the gun. He raised his hands high and wide, palms forward. "I am standing down," he said. The troopers advanced. One was young, his face pale and his AR-15 shaking slightly. The other was older, a sergeant, with a face like a worn-out boot. He wasn't looking at Jack's hands. He was looking at Boddicker. He was looking at the cuffed, terrified locals by the truck. He was looking at the one-eyed K9 who was still holding a perfect, silent guard position at the bottom of the steps. "My weapon is clear," Jack said. "My partner's friendly. He is a trained K9. His name is Bravo. Bravo. Down. Stay." As if a switch had been thrown, Bravo broke his rigid, threatening stance. He lay down on the gravel, his tail giving a single tired thump. That single command did more to de-escalate the situation than anything else. The young trooper cuffed Jack, his hands rough. "On your knees." "Easy, rookie," the sergeant said. He holstered his sidearm and knelt, not by Jack, but by the notebook on the porch. He looked at Boddicker, whose face was a mask of sweat and pain. "Sheriff Boddicker," the sergeant said, his voice dripping with a sudden, cold formality. "You look like you've had a rough night." "He attacked me," Boddicker spat. "He's crazy. He's the one who called this in." The sergeant cut him off. He looked at Jack. "You're Reed? Your CO called the superintendent. Directly. Woke him up. You must be one hell of a scout." The sergeant picked up Mike's notebook, handling it with 2 fingers. "This it?" "That's it," Jack said from his knees. "Mike Navarro's journal. Boddicker murdered him. The poultry plant is a meth lab. He's been running it. The locals," Jack nodded toward the cuffed men, "are his muscle." The sergeant stood up. He keyed his radio. "Sarge to dispatch. I have visual on the suspect. Looks like we have a 1045 officer involved. Get me the DEA, get me internal affairs, and get me a bus. This whole damn town is a crime scene." He looked down at Jack. "Get him up, and get those cuffs off him. He's not the suspect." An hour later, the sun began to rise. The red clay road was choked with official vehicles. The Pinhook Pond, as Jack had come to think of it, was being drained. Jack sat on the back bumper of a state ambulance. An EMT had just finished checking him. Bumps, bruises, but nothing broken. He had refused the shock blanket. Bravo sat between his knees, his head resting on Jack's thigh, finally asleep. The world had returned. Boddicker was gone, taken in a separate car. The locals were gone. The businessman at the plant had vanished, but the lab and all its evidence had been seized. The veteran Sergeant Harris walked over, holding 2 styrofoam cups of terrible burnt coffee. He handed one to Jack. "We found the spot where they dumped Harlan's boat. Just like the notebook said," Harris said. He sipped his coffee and grimaced. "You did good, kid. Messy, but good." "It wasn't my fight," Jack said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. It was Mike's. "Yeah, well." Harris looked at the house, now illuminated in the soft, gray morning light. It was a wreck, but the foundation looked solid. "Sometimes we gotta finish the fight for the ones who can't. Your CO, he said you were the best scout he ever had. Said you could see things other people couldn't." Jack looked down at his coffee. "Sometimes, that's the problem. Not tonight." Harris clapped him on the shoulder, a heavy paternal gesture. "You're gonna be tied up for a while. Statements, testimonies. The feds are gonna want to talk to you. But after that, what's next for you, Reed?" Jack looked up. He looked at the shattered porch. He looked at the woods, now just trees instead of shadows. He looked at the rising sun, which for the first time in years didn't remind him of the heat in Kandahar. It just felt warm. He thought of the empty apartment in Virginia, the VA clinic, the fluorescent lights, the feeling of being a ghost. Then he looked at Bravo, who was snoring softly. "I think," Jack said, a small, unfamiliar smile touching his lips, "I think I'm gonna fix the porch." Harris chuckled. He finished his coffee and crushed the cup. "Well, in that case, welcome to the county, neighbor." Jack sat there, sipping the worst coffee he'd ever tasted, as the sun finally broke over the trees. The war was over. The mission was complete. And for the first time, he wasn't just a survivor. He was home. Thank you so much for following Jack and Bravo's journey from the shadows of the VA clinic to the dawn at Raccoon Creek. Your attention and interest are what bring a story like this to life. Now, I have a question for you. Which part of Jack's internal battle, his struggle with guilt, his reliance on his training, or his bond with Bravo, do you feel was the most critical element for his survival?